Hello, and thank you for checking out my video. Today we are going to be replacing a rear turbocharger on a 2016 Ford Explorer. This is a 3.5 liter engine, sport, all-wheel drive, and I will show you what it's doing in a moment. Be forewarned, this is a very expensive proposition. The turbo is about $800 and the catalytic converter, I'm not sure how much it was. But in order to replace it, it requires some mad mechanical skills. Taking it out was easy, but make no mistake, it took me about 6 hours to put it all back together. So putting it in is a royal pain in the ass. So now that I've warned you what you're about to get yourself into, let's get started. Okay, so here's the vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and get in it right now, and actually that door handle's broken, so I'm going to have to use the inside here to get in. I'm going to start it, and I'll show you what's going on. You see all that white smoke that's coming out of the exhaust? Oh, this white smoke smells like burning oil. I don't know if you can hear this either, but there's a rattle going on underneath the hood. Okay guys, so I have this up in the air now, and what we're going to do to diagnose this is look for any oil leaks. I've already looked up here. I don't see any oil leaks, you know, from underneath it, looking up on the front one. But on the rear one, I do see a little bit of an oil leak. I don't know if I can, right there. So just right above the manifold, it looks like on that lever there that there's an oil leak and it's leaking down. And it looks like there might be something a little bit on the top side of the converter too. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to drop these two exhaust pipes. So this flex pipe here and this one here that goes to both banks. I'm going to go ahead and get them out of the way, and to do that you have 2 bolts there. 2 bolts there, and then on the other side of this you have 4 bolts holding on either pipe. If you're doing just the front turbo, you can get away with just doing the one, but since I'm doing both, and I'm hoping not to have to drop the subframe to do it, I'm going to go ahead and just get both these pipes out of the way right now. Okay, so what you're looking at right now, this is the rear manifold, and as you can see, you got a lot of oil on this bank. Over here, you don't have nearly as much. A little bit of soot, but not any oil. So oil definitely over here, and then if you look over here also into this one, there's a little bit of oil too. So I can now positively say for sure that the rear bank is leaking. Okay, so the next step in replacing this rear turbo is we have to remove this catalytic converter. So you have an O2 sensor right there. If you follow the wires up to that connector right there, that connector is going to have to come off. If you have not done so yet, remove the oil cap off this on the top, and then remove this engine cover. As there's going to be some components in here that you're going to need to get to from the top. Like this intake tube right here, and then the oxygen sensor also has there's an upstream one, and right there it looks like it's attached right almost right by the valve cover. You have the upstream O2 sensor connector, so that will have to come off as well. So now if you look up into the wheel here, that's the rack that I'm pointing to. Look a little further up, you see the upstream O2 sensor is disconnected. You have one nut there, you have what seems to be a pane nut on top there, and then a third nut there on the side. All these nuts have to come off for the catalytic converter to come out. Okay, so we got the catalytic converter out. I don't know if you can see in there, but there's some pretty ugly red spot in there, suggesting that's where the oil's been burning. And then of course, if you see that right there, been doing that too. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, guys, but if your turbo has been leaking oil into the exhaust, not only are you going to have to replace a very expensive turbo, but you're also probably going to have to replace a very expensive catalytic converter as well, because now your converter is oil contaminated, and it will not work, and it may very well plug up. Then it's contaminated, and it'll cause you another drivability concern, driving unplugged cats. So just something to be aware of. Okay guys, so the next part we're going to go for, there you got one bolt there, and you got one bolt on the other side. This here is your path for the oil once it cools and lubricates the turbocharger to go into the block. And this is where it enters here. If you look just above your right axle, you'll see where it enters the engine. So this tube will have to come out of the way. This is what the tube looks like once it's out of the vehicle. As you see, you got a gasket up there and two O-rings down there. It may give you a little bit of trouble getting it out of the block itself, but honestly, just blaster it, just turn it, work it out. It's just two O-rings sealing it. Okay, so our next step is this intake tube right here. So you got the reservoir oil discharge tube bolted onto. Just to the other side of it, there's going to be a intake tube. This isn't the only intake tube that there is on this thing. There's another one on towards the top of the turbo, but for now I'm going to worry about this one. We need to get it disconnected and pushed out of the way. Okay, so as you see here, I got the tube out of the way, and when I did that, oil started pouring out of it. You can see oil dripping right now. So not only was it going into the exhaust, more than likely it was partially going into the intake, would be my guess. So just to let you know. Okay, so now we're looking up at the back of the engine. You can see the drive shaft there where it goes in, the subframe. Looking up at it, I'm going to go ahead and point with my screwdriver. You got this little elbow piece right there. That elbow piece is the supply line, the vacuum supply line to the wastegate solenoid. That is going to have to come off. And then you have a piece up there, another intake piece that goes to the charge air cooler. That piece also has to come off. It's just an 8mm band that's holding that on there. So that piece and the wastegate solenoid vacuum supply line. So just a quick tip for that clamp back there. You may use an 8mm wrench to loosen it and unscrew it. But once it's unscrewed, you're going to have to come back up here, and you're going to have to get a few things up here. That clamp, this connector, this 10mm nut, and then if you look further back here, you have a connector there, and I believe that's it. And then this whole entire tube just comes off. You can just go ahead and remove the whole tube. And then there's one more thing that has to come off. I didn't mention that either clamp, the top or the bottom. I'm going to try to go for the bottom one since that looks like the easier one to get to. That has to come loose, and then that hose has to come off, and then this whole entire the hose will come out. Okay, so now that we got the charge air cooler out of the way, the tube for it, I'm going to go ahead and just do the regular air intake too. So we got 8 clamp there, another 8 clamp there, this hose if you feel like you need to get it out of the way. And then there is back here on this valve cover on the very corner, there's an 8mm nut right there holding that all on. We're just going to get this out of the way so that I have room to work. Alright guys, this is where the real fun begins, and I'll probably give you an actual diagram to show you what we're looking at. You will have to remove that oil supply tube. And it's all the way up there. More or less that there's a little safety clip on it, and then you have to take your fuel line tool. If you've ever done fuel line quick disconnects, you will have to take it and you will have to remove it via the fuel quick disconnect. Could be a royal pain in the ass. So I'll show you a diagram here of what it looks like on paper so you can see what you got to do. what might help you make this easier to see what size this is, I actually took the brand new one that we're gonna replace this tube, and I just went ahead and took my fuel tool like so, wrapped it around, and as you can see, the tool is flush with the notch. So once it's flush like that, this line is flexible. Once you get to the middle here, so you can actually show you, you can actually flex this line around a little bit. So it should wiggle out. If it doesn't, just work on it. Worst comes to worst, that fitting is a 6-sided fitting, so you can take that out too. You know, I would just try to do this first and then go from there. And as you see, if you break the safety clip, it's not a big deal because the new line comes with a safety clip. I'll explain here shortly why we need a new line. After you get that out, the last two things you need to get, there's a bolt right there and there's a bolt right above it. These lines here, these are your coolant lines. So once you get these out, coolant's probably bound to drip. So I'm gonna get the bottom one and then I'll get the top one. I know it's kind of hard to put a picture on it, but the two are pretty much right next to each other. One's on the bottom there that I'm pointing my light at, and then the other one's just right above it. The next step is to get more heat sinks or heat shields to remove, I should say. There's an 8mm bolt there. Further up, there's another 8mm there, and then I believe you can see the very top of it. There's another 8mm bolt right there. We're down to the final 3 bolts that are holding this turbo in. I'm going to do my best that I can to show you where these bolts are, but just be patient with me because it's in a really hidden spot. Okay, so you got 1, 2, and then there's a third one on the other side there. 3. Those are 15mm bolts. They all need to come off, and then in theory the turbocharger will come on down. Okay guys, so we got the turbo out and here it is. So I want to show you what this thing was doing. You see this little turbine in there? Just rattling around. It's completely separated. Definitely not good. So I'm thinking that's what our noise was this thing rattling around. So and of course if there are internal oil seals in this, having this just flopping around like this, it's going to definitely leak oil. Yeah, it's going to leak it all over the place, not just in the exhaust. You've seen that on intake side, it was leaking there too. So now it's on to the new turbo. So we can leave this oil line on here because we have a new one, and I'm going to explain why we have a new one. Let's turn our focus over here to the brand new turbo. So obviously all the ports come sealed, and the reason they become sealed is because you don't want to get contaminants into your turbo. It's a very sensitive system, and this is already a big pain in the butt as it is. So if you really want to be doing this a second time, I would recommend leaving all these little caps on here until you're ready to remove them. Now, of course, with that being said, this top cap is going to be a little more complicated because, you know, you have to take it off to mount it to the exhaust pipe. Another thing I wanted to show you here is the box that this came in. This is the box that this came in. So big old red octagon on it. What the note more or less is telling you is that you need to replace the turbo oil filter on this when you're replacing the turbo, and that's what it says right there, 3.5 liter turbo filter replacement. And it actually gives you the part numbers right there. I'll make sure to add it into the comments or whatever. But what they're more or less talking about is this tube right here. Now, one last thing you will have to transfer over on this turbo is a heat shield here, and this heat shield isn't on the new one, so that'll have to be transferred over. just the one 8mm bolt. We already took off the other 2 or 3 while it was in the vehicle. So I got it off, and it actually looks like one of these holes here is actually a nut where the heat shield should bolt into this, because obviously this one's for the turbo and then the other one's for the manifold itself. So that's something I'm going to have to deal with, and that's something, you know, when you're dealing with exhaust, guys, you're going to be dealing with a lot of rusty bolts. Exhausts are usually the worst. So, I mean, if you've done this work before, you know how it is. But we'll just have to deal with this. So after you transfer the heat sink over, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and attach this tube right now. And the reason that the oil filter, the turbo oil filter I was referring to, is on this end of the tube. And again, it's just a little insert. Either you can get it by itself or you can just get the whole tube. I'd recommend you get the whole entire tube. But once you have that, we're going to go ahead and mount it into this hole here, like so. Once you have it tight, you need to torque it down to 159 inch-pounds, and then once you get to that, then turn it another 90 degrees. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is the exhaust gaskets. This is the part number we're using, and this is the gasket that goes between the exhaust manifold and the turbocharger. As you see, they're, you know, with one long side, and it's kind of shorter here on the two. This exhaust gasket only goes in one way. So, just so you're aware of that, there is a gasket there. I just showed you the part number. So we are now ready to put this turbo in. Now, before I go fighting this turbo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 3 bolts that hold it, I'm going to go ahead and just put them in there right now. That way, once it's up in position, then I can just start turning them. So there's 1, there's 2, and I'll grab that 3rd one. Okay, so now we are heading in with it. As you see, I've left all the factory seals on there until we get it up in there, and then we'll go ahead and remove the top one only. Because again, you know, this is more or less what you're dealing with. I mean, there's room to do it. What I would do is I would take this spout right there, and I would just kind of wrap it around the axle, and then just kind of flip it while it's up in there. The coolant lines will fight you, but you can possibly get this up in there. So let's go ahead and do it. So I have the turbo up in there the way it's supposed to face. It is a real big pain in the ass to try to get this up in there, but it's possible. So now I'm at the point where I'm going to go ahead and remove that red cap that connects to the manifold. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to put the exhaust gasket on, and then we'll go ahead and start bolting this thing up. So I just got my gasket up in there, my exhaust gasket. The tabs on the gasket should be pointing upwards, and it only goes on one way. So I have it held in there. I'm going to go ahead and take the protective piece off the turbo, and we're going to go ahead and put it in. First bolt to screw in is the one outermost to the engine. You can reach it from underneath. These 2 other bolts can be gotten from the top. So what I would do is start the outermost bolt, and once you have a few threads started, make sure the other 2 bolts can still move in and out of the manifold freely. You'll want to do this because if those bolts get stuck, that could cross thread the turbo, and then not only do you get to remove the turbo again, then you have to break out your tabs. Once you have the outside bolt snug, then go back up and start the other 2 bolts. You can reach the turbo from the top, so as long as you didn't completely tighten this first bolt, you can wiggle the turbo around until the holes line up. So once you got the turbo all up in there and bolted again, what I would suggest doing is go ahead and tackle these coolant lines. There is a possibility that these coolant lines will get tangled, because you see that wastegate right there, and then you see the rod. Good towards the front there. Well, if you don't bolt it in right, that hose could really hang you up. The top hose can. So just be aware of that. If it does happen, then up here somewhere there's a 10mm bolt that mounts the cooling hose to the block. Just go ahead and remove that, and then it'll give you a lot more wiggle room. Okay guys, so we are finally back together. and I've got the vehicle running, and I've got clear exhaust smoke. So it's not burning oil anymore. Excellent thing. Don't let the time fool you. I mean, it practically took me almost 6 hours just for installation, and it's just because of dumb stuff. You know, there's a lot going on. Final thing you want to do is make sure that your coolant's full. I don't think that there's an actual bleed procedure on these. So you just fill it to the cold fill range, and then you just let it run until the thermostat opens. So you just want to make sure you got plenty of coolant. Second thing is you check the oil too, because if the oil's been burning, well, guess what? It's probably low on oil. This one actually wasn't low on oil, so I didn't have to add any. But yeah, this is pretty much how it's done. The installation steps I didn't show you all of, because I mean, installation is more or less reverse order of removal, and it's just remembering to put your coolant lines, your oil lines back on. And I will warn you, once you know half the battle is getting those oil lines up, or I'm sorry, not oil lines, coolant lines, to get your cooling lines up. So just so you know, you might very well struggle there. You'll struggle with putting it in, you'll probably struggle with getting it out. That'll be it. Thank you for watching.